All right. All right. Good morning, everyone. We've only got 18 folks, but it's already a couple minutes after 10, and I don't feel like waiting anymore. So to the extent you can be here on time, that would obviously be preferable. Couple things before we start. Comments. Assuming you're going to file them, send them to the entire work group. You do not need to send them just to me unless for some reason your system can't handle it. Sending them out to 100 and however many people. Send them directly to me. Otherwise, I'm sorry, do not send them directly to me. Otherwise, it's just delaying everyone's review of it. And for those who have not submitted comments, just fair warning, please, as we're moving through this process, I don't want to see, and John doesn't want to see wholesale changes, suggestions at the last minute that haven't been discussed in the work group. I don't think we'll take kindly to that. So only 2 sets of comments were submitted, OPC and staff. Staffs were a little more extensive than OPC. So with that, is anyone from staff available to kind of walk us through your changes on 0.03 and 0.04? And just as a reminder, I am recording this.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, awesome. Did you want to share? Do you want me to share my screen, or are you able to share?
I can do it.
Okay.
Oh, where is it? PC's comments. Hold on, give me 1 second. Thought I had them up. Save that. All right.
I think this is OPC's comments, Judge.
I think these are yours.
Oh,
I'm pretty confident they're yours.
it just says OPC on the cover page. So
Let's see. So can you see my screen?
yes.
All right. Okay. Well, I think I'm hiding. All right. I got the wrong. Okay. It does say OPC. So for whatever reason, it's not. I got 2 things up. Give me 1 second, please. I'm sorry. All right. Why is this not? All right. Why don't you go ahead? It's not working for me for whatever reason. Samarit.
All right, just give me 1 second.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I don't understand why it's not coming up.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yep, I got it.
Awesome. And, as I indicated last time, we're leveraging DOE's technical assistance in this work group, and Paul is on the line. So Paul, feel free to add if I'm missing anything or if you want to supplement any of my comments. All right. So here, I think we're in agreement with the joint Excel on utilities about not referencing the JADE roadmap. And then, we also agree with the joint Excel on utilities about not removing the consideration fitting into the types of projection kind of addition or language included here, and because we feel like it's an overarching kind of guidance from the commission.
Well, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'd like to challenge that summary because, the intent of, regulation section A here is to mimic the JADE process map Now, I don't have an issue with removing references to the J process map, but when you start changing the names of things, you're getting away from the J process map, and I really feel like the whole structure of this regulation is around the J process map, and I think it'll confuse things if we start trying to stray away from that, because the commission's direction was really for us to try to use the J process map when aligning our process.
Noted, John. Yeah, so I don't particularly feel strongly about removing the consideration fitting into the types of projections. I think we feel like it's an overarching kind of requirement, and specific requirements we've included in each subsection, like the DER and load forecast, grid needs assessment. But I note your comments. I felt like might be, going straight to the topics like the forecast scenarios. I think that's what we that's our comment. But I note kind of your comments about straying too much away from the joint roadmap.
Yeah, we have to organize this some way, and I just feel like the J process map is ideally suited to guide us on a framework of how we should structure these regs.
Go ahead, Joyce.
Thank you. I just said I agree with John by referencing the
Okay.
J cohort by name, just to put it in there.
Joyce, just to be clear, I wasn't as hung up on that as I was just about the underlying A1, A2, A3.
You just want to keep the format.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, I mean, if it's going to, as long as we're following the commission direction about the J process map, I don't care that it's mentioned in there, and I don't need to reference it or incorporate it by reference, but I just feel like we should be trying to at least adhere to that structure. And it's a very good structure. I think it lays out naturally the types of considerations. Now, we may all disagree underneath, about how to go about the process, but at least providing the structure, I would recommend that we, recommend to you, Chuck, you're the ultimate decider. That we
Mentioned the ultimate decider. Go ahead, Paul.
And I think the other thing that was suggested here was to use consistent language and words throughout the document. For example, there's a use of in one that was struck out, but if that's back in, projections is used inconsistently with forecasts. And if projections are the forecast, then I would suggest using the same words to mean the same thing. Also, there's input and assumptions that are used in the regulation, but here we're talking about considerations and whether those are the same. The intent is that's the same as the input and assumptions. Then maybe using the same words. The other on number what is now number one, but it has to do with forecasts. We suggested breaking out the scenarios as a separate from a structure, because the forecasts usually inform the scenarios to some degree, but there wasn't much discussion of how the scenarios would be created. There's a little bit there, but there's some suggested changes there. But anyway, there's a little bit of structural change that was suggested in this document too, just to make it clear what the process is.
Yeah, Paul, thank you. The considerations feeding into types of projections are really a different matter than the forecast. I mean, the forecasts are separate blocks on the JADE process map,
Understood, Jim. What I'm saying is just using consistent language. So
right.
about inputs and assumptions, I would talk about them that way. And if it's projections is the same thing as a forecast, then maybe using forecast. That's all.
Yeah, the considerations feeding into types of projections in the J process map actually goes down another level of detail. It's time horizons, it's the level of granularity, scenario projections to be analyzed, etc. So those are all considerations, whereas the forecast components are separate. So I guess
what I'm saying, John, is what you just described is what usually is called inputs and assumptions.
yeah, I'm trying to stay with the J process map terminology though, because
well, that's fine. It's just later on you make reference to other words. That's all. Whatever words you're going to use, I would just be consistent through the document. That's all.
All right, well, we can, I mean, if it's just wordsmithing, we can certainly do that hopefully without too much of an issue. All right, so it sounds like everybody's okay with removing this Jade roadmap reference. So, and we can tweak the terminology to ensure it's consistent throughout.
Okay, here. Just give me 1 second. Oops. Right, so I guess if we're keeping considerations fitting into the types of projections as John recommended to stay consistent with the language of the JADE roadmap, I think we could do that. But the way we kind of replace that with forecasts and kind of went straight to the forecasts discussion here. And so the first thing is like we thought the kind of recommending deleting the A in the time horizons requirement, because we felt like it was mostly covered in what used to be a C, that utilities have discretion regarding their forecasting process. So that's what we did. Any comments on that?
When you say C, are you talking further down?
Yeah.
Right.
Can you scroll down a little bit?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. So they want to get rid of A and just.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
You see it better?
Okay. So what you're calling C is actually B here, right?
Correct.
under
Yes.
their proposal.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. with
Okay.
me.
All right. Anybody have huge concerns with that? Okay.
All right. Here it's really not showing as a track change, and I apologize for that. But we've added a requirement for utilities to have separate DER forecasting for each type of DERs. Any comments on that? That's a new language. It, unfortunately, was not tracked. So it's a new requirement that we've added.
And there was also a note in your staff's comments that said EVs and electrification are not DER by themselves. I don't know if that, there you go.
Right.
Is that just observation, or is that recommending a change, or?
There's just noting on kind of highlighting on the supplementing the changes we've made.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about where you're at though. And this is really when I talked with Chuck yesterday. It looks like you just cut and paste and reorganize the whole documents. So I'm just wondering why, because DER forecast was covered much later on in the document, and it was in the same order as it was in the J process map. So I really got confused by why we're doing that reorganization. If you can just address that, because it just to me didn't make sense to stray from the order, which is a block by block on a process map.
Right. And Paul, feel free to add if I'm missing anything. But I thought, since we didn't have to, originally in our last work group discussion, we stopped. I think we had a consensus about not referencing the JADE roadmap. We felt like the draft regulation could benefit from some restructuring. Kind of the DER forecast component could be discussed first, and then the load forecast. We didn't really stick to the JADE roadmap kind of order. We felt like this makes more has more flow to it. That was it.
Yeah, I really, I leave it up to Chuck's discretion. I'm not the work group leader, but to me, if you have a process map and you have a regulation that describes the planning process, then the flow should be the process flow according to the process map. That's just the way I think.
That's kind of how
I
we
don't agree with start with forecasting. I mean, the process map that was described, in the J map, I mean, forecasting was close, but first you had the considerations feeding into the projections, and you had the goals and objectives, and then you got to the forecast. So I'm just picking back a little bit because I really feel like we have to have some structure so people would recognize that we're following the J process map.
Anybody want to weigh in on that? It seems like that makes sense. John's take makes sense to me.
Okay, so I mean, even if we stick with John's proposal to stick to the JADE roadmap kind of process map, we're proposing adding in that language to the DER forecast section. So I would just say that.
Okay.
I guess I'm trying to find where we had it in the load forecast or the DER forecast. So
let me scroll down there.
Yeah. Well, you can go back up to where you were at. I was just trying to find it on our document.
Right.
The original document.
Oh.
I mean, there were suggestions from SC. I forget who that was. About adding bidirectional electric vehicles and DER aggregations here from the last meeting, I believe.
The other addition is having the develop a forecast for each DER type, and then reconciling that into the load forecast.
Yeah,
which was essentially, I think, what was suggested by some of the parties in the comments. That's what's
Yeah. I mean, that's fine. I just want to make sure, when I have to convert this, that we account for it. I mean, the suggestion from the last meeting was about DER aggregations also, which I don't see in the staff recommended edits.
Yeah, those recommendations, the bidirectional EVs and DER aggregations were from Sierra Club.
Okay. Yeah, I think the bidirectional aspect is captured in staff's recommendation, but the aggregations is not. So basically, you're saying VPPs.
No, we didn't suggest that.
So maybe if we accept that and just add VPPs, and then we'll satisfy Sierra Club's request.
I think the issue is trying to figure out how you would actually include VPPs, since they're pretty fluid.
Yeah.
Sierra Club's comment was actually in the next block for load forecast. I don't know if it's more appropriate to be in the DER forecast or not.
All right. I'm pretty confused by all this moving around. I can't keep up with it. So I guess Sarah, you want to keep on?
Oh, sorry, John. Were you saying I was scrolling too fast, or like the whole restructuring?
Just the fact that all this is reorganized. I just can't keep up with moving between documents to try to figure out where things were, and I'm straying. So this is my problem, not your problem. But
Right. If it's helpful, John, what I can do is I can make our change on the original document, the original draft regulation that you sent around. I could add that in and send it to you, and what if that's helpful at all.
well, I don't know that we'll need that if we can just agree on
Following the roadmap. Right, John?
what's that?
Just follow, if we agree on just kind of structuring it as the roadmap is.
Yeah, and plus just what the particular edit here is.
Right. Okay.
So I guess for DER forecast, it sounds like we'll try to combine. Although I think that might have been Paul that was saying VPPs aren't. You're forecasting DERs. You're not forecasting aggregations of DERs. I mean, is anybody? I can't imagine that. I mean, you can't forecast VPPs, but because VPP should be pursuant to some tariff.
This is Paul, or wholesale market participation, and we're talking about a 10-year forecast, and so those may change every year. So there's and then you have different VP aggregators coming in and out of the market, and so it's quite fluid. So it's really difficult to try and forecast that. Now, forecasting the individual DER and what they may contribute is really fundamentally, but what the business models of the aggregators, and you're having to take that into consideration in a forecast is quite, I think at this point in the maturity of that is quite difficult.
All right, so you're recommending not doing the VPPs, just sticking with the DERs, and I think you have more expertise, Paul, than we do. So I'm inclined to go along with that. I mean, I have to recommend it to Chuck. I'm only advising Chuck. I'm just giving my opinion.
So if you're saying Paul's got more experience than you, then he clearly has more experience than me. Anybody disagree with Paul's take on that? All right. All right.
This is Andy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wouldn't disagree. I think the only consideration I would add to the mix is it might impact cost. I think when you're talking BPP, I do agree with John that that might be more of a tariff question depending on how you operate it or what's included, because that definition can be quite broad depending on the jurisdiction. But just the aggregation piece, I'm not trying to speak for Sierra Club of what they wanted to see there, but whether it's a programmatic approach to procuring, demand response or some of these technologies through a typical TR, total resource cost effectiveness test versus more of a market-based procurement, I think that does change the economics because you reach a different level of scale and it's a slightly different business model. So that would be something for consideration, as it may not change the type of resources, but rather the cost of procuring them.
Yeah, I think that, and Paul may be able to opine on this further, but I guess, the software that's out there, it sounds to me like you're limited in your ability to forecast by the software that's available. And if you're looking at, the software that's available, it doesn't sound like there's software that you can do BPP forecasting. It has to be done at the individual DER level.
So this is Paul. So I would agree with Andy on the cost dimension, and it does matter whether it's a tariff-based or a program or procurement or some market structure. So yeah, appreciate that. In terms of the forecasting, the issue is that you're going to have different, market participants, aggregators that are aggregating DER in different ways over time, as we've seen. So it's really difficult and they may switch between a program or market, or there's dual use, and trying to be able to forecast what they're doing and how they're going to behave and what the implication is ultimately on your net load. And then for distribution load impacts and power flow impacts over a 10-year horizon is really difficult, if not impossible. So that's at least from my view. So, that's why I'm suggesting not trying to, if you can do the individual DER types and approach that from an optimization and amongst the different ways that you might animate that, that is, doable, but difficult but doable. But yeah, not doing the VPP forecast, because then you're basically forecasting people's business models, which is difficult to do.
Understood. Okay. Sarah, you want to continue?
Yes. Okay, on to load forecasting. Again, I apologize for not, identifying changes that we've made. I thought we had it track changed here. So we've added D and E. Paul, do you wanna go through the comments?
So there were a couple things here. One is the wording around the PJM level forecast, and I apologize that you all may have discussed this in prior working group sessions, but typically there's a bottom-up distribution level forecast, particularly in the nearer term, and then of course something at a PJM level, which was talked about prior, is quite high level. There's a pretty big gap between those two, and the other is the PJM, even though they're the new FERC order requiring to consider state policies, they're still going to have some differences in policy direction that PJM may be taking into account in terms of assumptions versus distribution. So the thought here was to try and clarify this a little bit in terms of what might be a reasonable outcome for the parties, which is to have the distribution level forecast in aggregate be reasonably aligned with both the utility developed transmission level forecast for the local area, local transmission, and then the PJM system level. And the staff had an interest in ensuring that all three levels, if you will, all three forecasts sort of align up to a degree. But then instead of the waterfall approach was really here to get, which is not dissimilar, but really being able to articulate what the differences might be in terms of the associated factors. I use the term factor here, but it could be the same as the considerations that you're using in the document, which is the differences in any assumptions, the timing of when the forecasts were produced, the time horizons, and forecast methodology and other other factors. So that was the clarifications that were included here in D and E.
Okay. I personally feel like this is much better than what we had, and it also addresses an issue later on about how to reconcile between the PJM level forecast and the bottom up. So Chuck, I guess my advice is I think this is pretty good.
All right, any feedback on what Paul's take, the staff suggestions? Okay.
Yeah, this is Andy. I'll concur that. No, I'm concurring. So this is kind of in line with a comment I made a few sessions ago or last session about the calibration of the non-coincident peak forecast to the PJM forecast kind of didn't make sense as written, or I could understand where it comes from, but might not have been as useful. And I think this language helps clarify something that'll be more useful.
Great. All right. Thanks, Andy. All right. So hearing no objections, we'll make those changes.
Awesome. Here. Also, we've made some tweaks to, I think originally we had two scenarios, the goal scenario and then a baseline scenario. We've changed it a little bit we kept the goal scenario, but then rephrased the baseline scenario to a low scenario. Paul, you want to add anything to the changes we've made here?
So, from a planning standpoint, it's quite helpful to have a range when we're thinking about scenarios. And if the forecasts, so given the forecasts that are produced in this process, the goal scenario might end up being the high scenario as it's kind of been in many states. And typically it's helpful to have something on the lower end that helps to understand the sensitivity to timing and the scale and pace that the DER adoption or VPP utilization might play. So being able to understand that also helps inform, when investments may be needed, the types of investments that are needed, and the like. So given that there were two scenarios specified in the order, the thought was to have a high and a low scenario developed that then you could sort of test a range and understand kind of from a range standpoint what the some of the implications of what that might mean in terms of investments and the like, expenditures.
Paul, I don't have an issue with your wording, except, why can't we call the low scenario baseline scenario?
Because typically the baseline scenario in states where, or other, mostly in other states where I've seen this, there are three scenarios, and the baseline is the forecast scenario, is basically the forecast. And so here, because the order specified two scenarios, the thought was the forecast becomes kind of a reference, and then you're creating a high and a low scenario around that forecast. So baseline usually in the context is, as long as, you know, you all decide what it is you're defining baseline as. And it's not typically the, you know, status quo, so, or business as usual. So in this case, you know, you're usually it's in reference to the forecast, which is how this is worded here.
Yeah, the only problem that I have is, you know, we have to follow the commission order.
Right.
And the commission order already accepted the work group's recommendation for, you know, a goal scenario and a baseline scenario. So that's where that terminology comes from. Now, we could define a baseline scenario,
yeah,
similar to what you mention here, because I do think a baseline scenario is, you know, you got to take into account, you know, forecast for economic conditions and, you know, sensitivities, as you mentioned here. But so I'm not arguing with your recommended wording. I just, you know, would like to at least be consistent with the commission order. And maybe we can call it a baseline/low scenario or something like that.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed that. So I agree with you. I mean, you could refer to the baseline as a low scenario or something like that. So baseline and then hyphen a low scenario that reflects, you know, something like that.
Yeah, we never really, at least I didn't see the work group actually define what that baseline scenario was.
I don't think we did.
So I think we have an area of freedom there, but I just think that, you know, my recommendation is just leave low in there, but, you know, baseline/low scenario.
I think when we talked about baseline, it was just kind of what the utilities are doing now. But
Yeah.
That's as explicit as we got from my recollection. All right, so we need to tweak the wording a little bit on that. Does anybody have any concerns on these? All righty. Oh, one,
All right.
Samara, can you go back up just one, just a little bit?
Yep.
Okay, the commission on C, commission may request or a utility may propose additional scenario. I think we may have talked about last meeting that it should be possibly a stakeholder may propose another scenario, or am I misremembering?
Yeah, I had raised that last time. I think we agreed that we could change the language there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe that was something I was supposed to do and I failed to do it. So, all right, I'll put a note in there for myself. All right, go ahead. Okay, awesome. Yes, sir. Or ma'am, TJ.
Hey, Chuck, good morning. Just adding that the joint excellent utilities are at a bit of low capacity this morning, so we'll provide our recommendations in our capacity this morning, but would like to get a deeper look to staff's recommended edits to the regulation.
Understood.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. Here we recommended deleting the level of granularity language that was added. I know, John, you may have an issue with this, but we felt like the whole granularity discussion should apply to every topic, not just to the grid assessment portion of it. I feel like this was more targeted towards the grid assessment piece. So we've tried to add the type of granularity that should be provided in each subsection, like the DER forecast, the load forecast, the grid needs assessment. We've tried to add that in there kind of delete that here, but you may have comments here.
Well, we also clarified there's further language below, I think, on the planning analysis.
Yeah. The only comment I'll have, and I understand now a little bit better what you're trying to do. I have to say, until you discussed it, I did not understand what you're trying to do. I even talked to Chuck last night and said I have no idea what's with this. So, but in order to remain consistent with the J process map, where level of granularity, I would like to leave at least something similar to the top part in, and just say, as described, the granularity of information may vary by will vary by component in the J process, or don't even have to refer to J process, but will vary by component as described in sections of this regulation. Something like that, so that we can at least tie it back to, the J process method. And then leave it up to, each individual section where you discuss level of granularity as you propose.
Got it.
Does that raise an issue?
I think I'm good with that. Paul, do you have any comments?
Not on that. And then, we have revised language about the feeder analysis that's below, I think.
Yes.
All right. Anyone else?
Oh, sorry about that. I scrolled
No,
too
you're
quick.
fine. You're fine. No, people are quiet today. No, I'd say go ahead, Samarit.
All right. So I think we've discussed this up top. So I'm just scrolling down further. So we didn't really provide any additional comments on the data sources, scope and access. I was hoping to see some comments from the Joint Excellent Utilities on how that process should look like. I feel like there was some proposal, if I remember correctly, Jacob was going to provide. So we will promise that we are going to provide additional comments on this, but we didn't really provide much comment here. Okay. So I'm going to scroll further. So the goals and objectives. I think we had a comment here. It said, so this is covered in the well, go ahead.
Just can we go back up to market prices? I know you didn't mention that, but
Yes.
pursuant to Paul's earlier comments about BPPs and forecasting business models and the difficulty in forecasting DERs, but I do think that it gets into this a little bit because BPPs are going to be under either retail and or wholesale tariffs. So I just am thinking that maybe we shall consider DERs and BPPs in here as an addition.
Yeah, this is Paul. One suggestion is to maybe define what's meant by VPPs somewhere in the document. If you've got.
Yeah, we provided a definition in here that was really the definition was the same one that was used by the energy storage work group, and I can't remember where that is.
I don't see that it made it in here, John.
Yeah, it's number 4.
Oh, number 4.
02.4.
Oh, okay. I was looking at the definition.
Virtual power plant, VPP, also referred to as an aggregation, means a collection of distributed energy resources, potentially including energy storage devices that could provide grid services when aggregated together and coordinated with grid operations. And again, we're using an energy storage regulation definition here, which is why they're highlighting energy storage in the definition. But,
I added the note about I added the also referred to as an aggregation,
Right.
because for, to clarify this, just so there's, there's people can see that they're referred to as the same thing.
Okay, yeah, so,
just
that's fine, that's fine. It'll just be different than a little bit different than the energy storage, and maybe the next rev of the energy storage, we can add that. But I do think that, we're trying to lift off VPPs and other proceedings, and I do think that's going to be a more important component, because really we're going to be looking at VPPs, the benefits of VPPs on the grid, and maybe even there'll be some retail tariffs coming out of the planning for efforts, so that we can have some non-wire solutions that include VPPs to help solve some of our grid issues.
Yeah, of course. What the question I had here, the way it was written, John, was that this could be interpreted a couple of different ways. One is that because there's a focus on coordination of market participation, which would suggest on one read that this is about implementing those processes and technologies that are necessary for supporting the FERC 2022 requirements.
Right.
And if that's the intent, then I think that's different than the forecast, because those capabilities are necessary whether you have a few or a lot.
Yeah.
Or it could be around, as you were just touching on, and Andy mentioned, it could be program design, could be tariff design. And again, that's a little outside of the planning process, other than taking into account the cost considerations that Andy mentioned. But it could be distinct, and probably in the near term would be distinct from a forecast.
Yeah, I think we had that earlier discussion.
Yeah.
And I agreed. I guess the only point, and again, a lot of this document reflects the work group's prior work, and they did discuss market prices, and this is what they recommended to the commission. So it's just, bolted in here. But after thinking about the earlier discussion, I was just suggesting adding VPPs here, and if there's anything else that should be going in here, we can discuss that too. But I wasn't really trying to make a big issue out of it.
All right, so I guess we can go ahead and press.
All right. Again, I feel like I think we agree with the joint Exelon utilities. I think, John, you're probably going to have a similar comment on straying too much away from the JADE roadmap order, but we felt like it's a very general kind of language. So didn't really see a lot of use for it here, but did you have any comments on this?
Well, first, you also got rid of all the goals and objectives because they were stated initially in an edit. Does anyone have any issue with wiping out these entire sections?
Well, I do. I mean, the goals and objectives, again, it's on a JADE process map. And while I agree we don't have to be as prescriptive, and we can just make a general reference to the PUA, instead of hard coding each of the PUA goals in here. I mean, that's one thing, and that way it would survive if the legislature updates the PUA. And I'm talking about, section 7-802 in the PUA, I think. But I do philosophically just have an issue with straying too far away from the J process map. In addition, and that's just the state policy, or the goals and objectives. I did add some things related to goals and objectives of the commissions, because, ultimately we have to adopt the policy goals of the legislature, but the commission also has a policy. And this is from the work group summary, the state policy priorities, which is next. I mean, this is what the work group stated, and recommended to the commission, and the commission accepted it. State policies shall be included in mid and long term. So unless you're providing that guidance in the document, you're going to lose it. And it's already been something deliberated by this work group and recommended to the commission. So I am not in favor of, if something's been ruled on by the commission, get rid of it unless you want to revisit that recommendation with the commission. And the second item B here is in the statute, and there's no way for for me to be able to satisfy the legislature that we're taking their intent into account in our planning process unless we put this pursuant to Public Utilities Article 7-804, we put this in here. That way, when the bill sponsor asks, what have we done? I could say to the bill sponsor that, we're directing the utilities, to consider investment in procurement, cost-effective demand-side methods and technology, because this is exactly the wording that's in the statute. So, there's a reason why these things got in here, and the holistic approach to grid planning and the integrated system planning are objectives from the commission. So this whole JADE process map is goals/objectives. That's what it states. So not only did I put the state policy goals in, but I also put the commission, goals in, or objectives. So, unless we just want to recommend the commission that we disregard, their in their process, what they've expressly stated, I'm just not recommending getting rid of this stuff.
John, I think the key issue was that goals and objectives are addressed in two places, I think, in this this draft. So that was one of the comments. And then there were, in the last discussion, there was some discussion about language that would incorporate, certainly any statutory regulatory requirements by reference.
Yeah, and we could do that with 7802 and then this 7804, but somehow I need to keep the commission's objectives in.
So a question I have just procedurally, some of the language there in terms of the holistic approach to planning, in ordering, I've seen in other states where ordering language has that language in it, but the regulation itself doesn't necessarily have it, for the reasons that, I think the joint utilities described. So I don't know how you all approach it, but I appreciate what you're saying about, this is the intent of this regulation, but, I don't know how you, how that's typically done in Maryland.
Well, I think we're, making something new here. I mean, typically, in other regulations that I've worked on, you know, we don't put goals and objectives in the regulation, but we've adopted the J process map, and that's, you know, left a space to put goals and objectives. So, you know, that's why it's in there. And I do think that over time we can lose some of this stuff. And I know, especially with integrated system planning, at least one of the commissioners is emphatic about you know, that being an objective, and I got a feeling if we didn't put that in, that that would cause some issues.
So the staff suggested changes. There's a reference to goals and objectives elsewhere in the document, I think earlier on. And
Yeah, it's pretty general though.
right,
I don't know where that is, because this originally was pretty high up.
It looks like it's, if I'm reading the same one, it's the very first 1501A. It states this chapter applies to electric system plans for the advancement of state policy goals, yada, 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 and all other relevant state goals and targets that exist at the time of planning.
So are you suggesting maybe moving this into the applicability section?
the elements of it, as you know, as we were just discussing. Not necessarily all of the language. Some of this could just be referred to as, for the reasons that some of the parties have mentioned. We could be more specific. I mean, in the sense of referring to a particular statute and the fact that things may change over time.
Yeah. Well, let me in the next rev see what I can do with this whole site. I don't want to lose this. I'm not adverse to moving it around as long as we keep a block. For instance, because of the fact that the J process map refers to goals and objectives, even if we wanted to treat it in the applicability section, I would want to, make a reference to it. Goals and objectives, this, the distribution system planning process, shall meet the applicability requirements in regulation 01, something like that. But I really don't want to lose the J process map structure.
Yeah.
Because, that's the thing that ties it all together. And I think, it's just one of those things that, I think once we start messing with the framework, then I'm worried about losing things.
Right. Noted, John, on the comment on including state policy goals, especially our agency goals. Unless anyone has any comments, I'm just going to scroll down to the next section. All right. I think we've discussed DER forecasts. This is part of, the whole track changes is part of the restructuring that we've recommended, but what we've added in hosting capacity discussions is we've added some, I think, wordsmithing here, similar to the, the other subsections for the utilities to report on the progress towards determining hosting capacity and reporting hosting capacity capabilities. So we've added that. I think we've made some changes here. Any comments on?
Yeah, I have
change
some
here.
Yep, go ahead, Eddie.
Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, I wanted to comment on the hosting capacity section here. Just in general, not so much on staff's comments. So I guess I can pause if there's any questions directly on staff's comments. Okay. I think,
Sounds like you got
Chuck,
the
last
floor.
time we talked about, I raised a comment, I think, and then somebody from, maybe it was Pepco, I'm forgetting who raised the question, but it was sort of like when our previous comments, reflected the fact that the indirect or not indirect, but that reference to 06Q of Chapter 9 sort of has language that is less than specific in terms of using best engineering practice to calculate. I think there's agreement in the work group report for the DSP that, it shall be on calculated on a feeder level and incorporate DER forecast for purpose of right sizing and considering hosting capacity upgrade plans and things like that. But I made the reference that the interconnection working group, and this is maybe something for John, because we discussed it. I raised the question that should we have more coordination, and there was a comment from the utilities that, why are we discussing this? I thought that was agreed to handle under the interconnection working group and that other process. And I think there was, I think Chuck, you were mentioning, maybe John can weigh in on this since he's the leader of that work group. I was trying to read through the phase 5, final report on the interconnection work group, with errata filing from, I think that's the most recent, John, but I'm reading through that and seeing, a fair number of references of recommendations that the distribution system planning working group take up, the broader hosting capacity framework. And I'm not sure, I haven't traced the exact threads to see, because there was reference to like the commission, we recommend the commission should order that the DSP working group take this up and so on and so forth. And I know there has been subsequent discussions in this working group about hosting capacity. I'll just leave it at one comment and pointing out to page 38 of that final report where it says, in the meantime, the report relies on existing COMAR 2050-09 06Q 3 and 4 below for the calculation of hosting capacity until a distribution system planning methodology can be established to provide a uniform practice for Maryland utilities. So, our observation was, given the state of utilities being at multiple levels of calculating the actual hosting capacity available, that we think the regulation should be more specific about a shared consistent practice or framework to actually calculate the hosting capacity, and that if a certain utility isn't able to reach that for whatever reason in the short term, they can obviously, as discussed previously, get a waiver from the commission.
Yeah. Andy, it is Andy, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Thanks for providing all that background. And I do agree with you. The only reason the interconnection work group even addressed some of these hosting capacity issues is because of the fact that we needed them just to do interconnection things. And the DSP process, hadn't even started when we started some of these discussions, because, the DSP work group wasn't started until 2021, and our first hosting capacity related regs were in 2019. So that's why you have the references to like good at engineering practice, which means that we leave it up to the utilities to determine how they will calculate the hosting capacity until something better and more consistent comes along. We weren't trying to be prescriptive, except where we needed to be prescriptive just to do things on the interconnection side. So the problem we have is I don't think we have a recommendation from the work group, how to do hosting capacity. So I think it's still one of those things that we can point to the fact that we need to do some more work here. But as far as the initial set of regulations, I think we need to basically still follow them. And that's why you have the references until we have something better.
Great. Yeah, thanks, John. That makes a lot of sense. And I don't disagree that we should reference those in section F here. And maybe I think what you're saying here confirms a little bit of the thrust behind our initial comments, which was, if the methodology for actually calculating hosting capacity is not required in those regulations being pointed to, then maybe we ought to add some consideration here, even if, you know, even if that is aspirational at first, just so that we understand that there's an expectation around the methodology and overall framework for calculating hosting capacity, and not just the points on
Right.
segment A and B here.
Well, you know, maybe you can, and I was trying to find where you address this in your comments, but I'm not seeing recommended wording in here about hosting capacity.
Yeah, I think there might have been multiple versions going around. So, and we had not worked up the final wording recommendation yet, so we'll do that shortly, but we just flagged that as an area for more discussion with the work group, because I think it's obviously one of the bigger, meatier subjects that requires more work.
Yeah. And I, you know, the one thing that I want to stress, at least from my perspective, is I think it's really important to start this process and get these regs in. And, you know, these will evolve over time. You know, I think, you know, and I'm an outsider looking at the work group up to this point. I think Chuck has done a great job in leading it. But if there's one thing that, you know, I think that, you know, I see is some of the stakeholders up to this point have pushed for things that utilities are not capable of doing yet. And also we haven't been, you know, so I do think that, you know, if you start somewhere and you can build that over time, but if you try to write the regs to require things that the utilities are not capable of, you know, because I noticed in the interconnection work group that the utilities had varying capabilities, and even to recalculate hosting capacity on a periodic basis. You know, we had you know, one company which was basically doing hosting capacity calculations in a spreadsheet. So you know, it's one of those things where you know, we got to start somewhere, and I don't think we should hold up regs trying to be perfect. I think we should try to put in what we can do, and then point to the future where possible. If you have recommended language that kind of recognizes that, you know, I think it would be great to get that.
Great. Yeah, we'll work those up. And I think if I were just to look at that first top line, I think for me, if we're wanting to land this, and I agree with having the iterative development over time, it might be just the wording about utilities shall follow the hosting capacity requirements in 06Q of Chapter 9 when establishing. So like the fact that we're pointing externally to requirements that are less than complete around the actual methodology for calculating the available hosting capacity, and then saying use that requirement to come back and develop the actual establishment of new policies. I think there's maybe some strengthening we can just make that's real simple, but indicates like in the DSP regulations over time, this is where we expect the evolution to happen, if that's what people agree ought to be done.
Okay,
And
well,
I would advocate it.
I look forward to
advocate it would be.
from y'all.
Okay, thanks, John.
All right, thanks, John. Jacob, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I took it down. I think John honestly hit a lot of, you know, what I was going to just touch on, of just, you know, reminding that we're looking, one, agreeing it should be iterative and having a place to start. And really that place that we should be starting is where the kind of commission landed in terms of the orders and the direction that they gave us. And so just making sure we're kind of using that as the basis for developing it.
All right, very well. Anyone else? All right, so we'll look for some wordsmithing from OKC on that one.
Right here, I think the original language for grid needs and locational value assessment was I think, all about locational value assessment. So we've added.
Can you go up just a tick
Oh.
to where it says utility shall under, I guess, what it would now be C? Just wondering if anyone had any thoughts on that.
I
Or
can.
if the utilities had any feedback on it, if they'd had an opportunity to look at it. So you just had it.
Right. I just changed. It didn't look like it was visible, all the changes, but so it would have been.
It looked like it would have been the very top of page 25.
All right. Right here.
Yeah, right there. Utility shall. Jacob, I know you just joined, and I don't know if you guys have had an opportunity to have a look at this, but just wondering if you have any impressions initially.
Yeah, I will definitely have to take it back. We hadn't had a chance to kind of fully discuss it. Initial reactions is, I think as I'm reading it, it's basically just saying we shall report out as part of our filings, progress that we're making here. And I think that makes sense and supportive of that, but we'll definitely make sure to take it back and discuss.
All right, thank you.
Right. Just wanted to say that it's a similar language that we've used for DER forecasting, load forecasting. Just provide an annual report on any progress to improve their current practices.
All right, thanks, Samuel.
Yep. So grid needs and locational value assessment, as I said earlier, was more, I think it was focused on just the locational value assessment piece of it. So we've added some additional requirements for the grid needs portion of it, and we separated it out. Paul, do you wanna go through the changes?
Yeah, it's so as Summer said, we just broke those out so that it's a little clearer, and we were also trying to address some of the questions and considerations that folks had commented about and discussed in the last meeting that I was able to participate in. So this was attempting to try and I think strike a balance between what I heard the various parties discussing last time, which was that the planning analysis would include an assessment of potential constraints across the utility system at a feeder level, which seemed to be consistent with the commission's order, which is described as or defined as grid needs assessment, and then those particular constraints that are identified would be provided. That's the information that would be provided, so that there was trying to be some clarity about what information was being provided as part of the process as well. And then again, the annual reports would provide any changes to sort of an incremental basis if there's any substantive change in the grid needs assessment that might happen between planning cycles. And then again, sort of consistent with the overall tone of the other language in the regulation about continuing to improve the planning analysis and processes.
All right, thank you, sir. Joyce, I saw your hand up.
You did, but I was waiting for locational value. I thought we'd skipped it, but I think that's coming up in the next box.
Gotcha. Very good. Go ahead, Samantha. Samantha, if you're speaking, it looks like you're muted.
There we go. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. This is more of a global comment about sort of the grid needs in general. And forgive me if I've mentioned this in the past.
No apology necessary.
Sorry?
No apology necessary.
Okay, great. Well, so the question I have about the grid needs portion of these regulations is it clear to others in the work group what is meant by grid needs? In other words, what should we expect to see in this section of the filings? And I ask that because it's not immediately clear to me what constitutes a grid need. I would offer, for example, that in other jurisdictions and other states where I've seen grid needs defined, they tend to include things like reliability, sometimes resiliency, sometimes things like voltage support, and typically capacity needs. So there is, a tie into hosting capacity very clearly in the grid needs assessment. And I guess what I'm wondering, and I'm maybe even suggesting that I think that the grid needs section needs to be a little bit, maybe the grid needs themselves need to be defined, or specific categories of grid needs that will be expected to be assessed should be included here. And again, that's partly because it's not clear to me what to expect in this section. And I think this is a really important piece of the plan.
All right, thanks, Samantha. Looks like Joyce agrees with you. Yeah, go ahead, Jacob.
Well, just one point of clarification. We're right now we're talking about the process, right? Not the actual filing. Because I think there's, I guess, two separate things worth discussing, right? One is, what is the grid needs assessment that the utility does as part of its process? And then the second piece is then, what are the utilities publishing as part of its filing, right?
That's what it sounded like. Is that correct, Samantha?
I think so. Part of me feels like those should be the same thing.
Okay. All right. Jacob?
I guess I was going just to say, obviously, I think we're talking about the process versus like what actually is in the report. And so just wanting to make sure if we're talking about like, what is the utility providing in the report, that's a discussion in, I think that's in section 4 versus section 3, which is about the planning process.
Right. So you don't necessarily object to specifying what should be required, or the criteria to be required for the grid needs. Is that correct? It's just,
well, I think it already defined a lot of that in terms of what information from a grid needs perspective would be shared, right? The straw proposal had a lot of details in each of the steps of what the utility would be sharing, around grid needs and other information as well. And so I thought as a working group, we kind of already had worked through what information would be shared.
okay. Well, I know we keep going back to the straw, but I mean, but we have to put whatever's in the straw into the regs. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. So maybe the stuff's out there. We just have to throw it into the regulations. And I'm sure everyone will do that in the next round of timely filed comments.
Well, one of the, I mean, to Samantha's point, the grid needs, could be those technical things, like capacity, voltage, et cetera. But grid needs can also be, what is needed to meet state policy goals. So I'm not sure I'm in favor of, defining every little detail, but if there's some more specificity to kind of allude to those things, somebody can propose it, but it just seems to me like if you define it, you're at risk of leaving something out, and I think on the surface, we've already kind of pointed out that the whole planning process, needs to meet our policy goals, which includes things like resilience and reliability and things of that nature, but doesn't get down the specificity where it talks about, meeting, you know, with adequate voltage and things of that nature.
So this is Paul. One of the things I noted in the discussion last working group and in the comments that were provided, there was some difference of opinion as to what level of information is provided for as part of this process, and what analysis is being produced during this analysis, you know, during this grid needs. So the language that's proposed is trying to address both. The first being that the forecast are being used to assess the grid needs. I picked up the word constraints, but that it wasn't really defined, and that could be more broad, as folks may agree. But the idea is that the planning analysis would assess those needs over the planning horizon, and the results of that, the needs themselves that are identified. So to the extent that there aren't any needs identified, then they would not need to be provided in terms of, you know, it's basically this subset of needs that comes from the planning analysis, because I think there was some concern about having to provide, you know, all the data that might be required as part of the planning process, which is pretty extensive, and probably well, it is, you know, it's much more than is really needed. So this was trying to address both of those issues, and then not get into all the, you know, start to tee up some of the considerations that would come, or some of the factors that would come out of the grid needs. Obviously, there's a reporting section, and I appreciate that there's an interest to consolidate all the reporting in one place. But so that's what this was trying to do. These changes.
Yeah. Well, I personally like the changes that are proposed. I was just reacting to, you know, the pros and cons of trying to get too specific in defining grid needs.
All right. All right, anybody else?
Yeah, this is Andy.
Go ahead, Andy.
I'll just add, I also appreciate the changes. They address a comment I made early on initially, just that this section was missing the grid needs and was focused more on the locational value. And so I think the specificity here is a good step. And that under the proposed staff language on 1B, or, you know, looking at current and forecast distribution constraints for substation and feeder, including the engineering, timing, and other relevant characteristics for each identified constraint, that might go towards Samantha's question about defining what are we meaning by constraints. Of course, this is sort of after the fact, like what do the utilities choose to focus on? I know that's to a certain extent tied up with what tool base they have. I think I've seen reference in the interconnection working group to, and maybe in this one to, you know, secondary analysis, secondary feeder nodes or circuits require, you know, more specialized or costly software. A lot of utilities don't have those presently, and use more like engineering and best practice and or sort of common practices. And so I was going to say, sorry, that was a long kind of tangent. I do agree that this adds specificity. It's helpful, and it would be great to review sort of in each utilities report those sort of descriptions of what their process targets, how they study it, and then providing the engineering solutions or identification of whether it's voltage or thermal constraints, or if we're talking about hosting capacity upgrade plans, because those details matter once you get to how DER can solve relevant constraints or not, and what's in the solution set, those sort of parameters. And then I was going to offer or recommend maybe in the definition section, even though John, I agree and hear what you're saying about you don't want to define a constraint as necessarily one thing, but maybe a general for the non-technical reader of the regulations, you know, putting grid constraints, which is more or of a jargon term of art, into the definition section could at least, you know, allow people to say grid constraint means in this document things such as, you know, voltage and thermal violations on the distribution network, and others as appropriate by the utilities.
All right, thanks, Andy. And Andy, my thought was we'd go through staff's comments and then just come back to OPC and you guys could run through yours. I don't know if that's the best way to do it rather than kind of jumping back and forth. Okay, all right, just wanted to make sure I was cool with you. All right, thanks, Andy. All right, anybody else?
So I just want to, I guess the sum I took from this is we're going to accept these edits because it sounds like we got staff and OPC at least agreeing. And Andy, I would say if you want to add a definition, you know, for grid needs or constraints, you know, feel free to propose it.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking through a logistics question, which maybe I'll just put out there now, which is, you know, I think, like I mentioned, and I think others have identified, maybe John, you mentioned you're having trouble keeping track of different things, and will there be an opportunity to review the draft final regs and then comment on the final version so that we can, like, for example, accepting what staff has put forth here, but with minor comments on that version? You know, how many iterations do we expect to have before we finalize? I know Chuck is saying as soon as this wraps up, we're done. This is good. I'm just kidding.
No, I mean,
you did a great job last time, Chuck.
I mean, thank you. But I mean, you know, we've got parties who, you know, only OPC and staff submitted changes, and we have some parties that aren't here. So my guess is there'll be some further tweaks, you know, especially from the utilities. So I don't want to say it's going to be etched in stone as of, you know, as of 11:30 today. So yeah, go ahead, Jacob. Yeah, so just because we're necessarily accepting some changes today doesn't mean they're final.
No, yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, we've already indicated that we plan to submit red lines.
Right.
Most of our comments have so far been in comment form. So
right.
just wondering, like, should we give you all those red lines and then staff has theirs and then others have theirs and you combine them and then everybody takes a look at the clean version and then we kind of agree to finalize? Is that how you're anticipating it?
That's kind of what I've done in the past, at least with with the reports. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So time permitting, that'll still be the plan. Yes, sir, Jacob.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, want to make you know, initial reaction to kind of these. I think they generally make sense, but want to make sure to run them by the SMEs for both of our teams to make sure they're comfortable with it.
Gotcha. Understood. John, you had your hand up. You don't actually.
Yeah, I
raise your hand.
want to make sure. You know, I do think that it gets to be problematic if people are commenting on different versions, you know, and I do think that there's a problem because of, you know, the cadence of our work group here is every 2 weeks we're having a meeting. So if we make agreements on things, you know, there needs to be time to like update the draft regulations before people comment on it or otherwise.
Yeah, we're working on the same sheet of music. Agreed 100%.
Yeah, so I would say I think I'm saying enough from this meeting that I could take a shot at it and maybe get something out this week. You know, and then, you know, that would be, you know, give you at least maybe another week to get comments before the next meeting.
Yeah, if you could, if maybe get something out by Thursday, have comments due by Thursday in advance of the next Tuesday meeting.
Yeah, I could try, but with this legislative session, I don't control my own time here.
I get it. I understand.
So I'll do my best.
That's all we can ask. All right, moving on. Samarin.
All right. Okay. So the locational value assessment, we did add some additional language. I think we've added B and C. Paul, do you want to take a stab at the changes we've made?
Yes. I think so. It's added some clarification around what would be included. So there wasn't really clarity around, if I remember correctly, clarity around what locational value included. And so, and it could range in terms of what may be involved. The thought here was to establish what the minimum requirement for locational value, which is the potential here. It's defined as the potential deferral or avoided value of traditional wireless solution as appropriate. And that doesn't mean that it couldn't include other values that are identified as part of the process and outlined in the objectives and priorities that are established earlier in the process. And then it goes on to require that the utilities develop as appropriate a locational economic value methodology that incorporates the values identified by the commission to do this and then ties back to the state goals. So there's a proactive requirement to have an economic model or value methodology developed that then would be used. That wasn't really in there before. And then again, consistent with other sections in the regulation about continuous improvement. So that's what C is about.
Just a question, Paul. What type of direction is going to be given by the commission? I'm not following, incorporates values identified by the commission. I'm not.
So
that.
Yeah, so different states have taken different approaches to this. Some just look at what the deferral value or avoided cost value for the traditional wires. In other cases, they may include wholesale market values, which are identified as a potential value earlier in this regulation. And you need to have a methodology by which you're doing that because LMP prices are they're in the moment. So how do you forecast that? How do you develop a methodology that's accepted? It may be, as Andy said earlier, you're using the methods by which you're assessing or applying the methods you may be using coming from the standard practice manual for demand side management programs. As part of this, you may include, which may include GHG. You may include things that are related to communities, community impacts. So there's a number of different things that may be accounted for. In some states, there's a big focus on resilience, and so there's a methodology that the commission may have established with respect to doing resilience analysis. California clearly has one on that ties into their risk spend efficiency methodology, particularly in the wildfire context. So they're not always in the planning proceeding is the establishment of what these values might be. They may be in other proceedings, and so to the extent that those become relevant in the planning may be identified here, and things change over time, so things may evolve. So that's what's reflected, kind of in the spirit of that, things continue to evolve aspect.
Yeah, I guess I really feel like some of those values identified by the commission are really the benefits part of what we're doing in our benefits cost analysis work group, because it hits a lot of what you stated, avoided cost, deferral value, GHG, things of that nature.
Yeah,
I would rather not have the commission have to, specifically identify values, but they should be consistent maybe with the types of things we're placing value on in the benefit cost analysis.
So John, that's the spirit of what it was intended with the edit, was what you just said. So to the extent that the commission is evaluating benefits and cost and is updating that on some basis, those would be the benefits that may be included, and some of those may be relevant to distribution, some may not. So how that's then determined, but the use of the term value here is just to be consistent with the use of the word value in the.
Yeah, am not, I'm, you know, I like what you proposed. I would just like to sit and maybe offer some
Sure.
alternative wording just for that piece. And to David Comis's comment, you know, I think if you look at the case 9674 BCA, you'll see that, you know, some of the things you talk about with resilience, reliability, et cetera, included in that case, because what we're trying to do is have a uniform way of dealing with benefits and cost analysis for DERs specifically. But I think, you know, more globally, it can be, you know, the benefits can be applied to locational value. So let me work with the wording and maybe just that one very small piece, just maybe offer an alternative.
Yeah, this is Andy. I just wanted to put out there for locational value. I know there's reference to at minimum, the distribution avoided cost, or sort of the potential for deferral of traditional wires. And we're talking about, in the main language, it's identified distribution constraint. And I think that's, I mean, that's appropriate, I would say, although, like, given that the work group, I think, started under the distribution system planning process, and then the House bill was introduced and passed about expanding the scope to electric system plan. Just wanted to point out, you know, the significance of including in these locational value assessments a consistent framework across, you know, sub-transmission and transmission. Because I think I've seen, you know, cases where on the transmission side, a non-wires assessment might include something just as simple as, you know, what is the ability of a lithium-ion battery to offset, you know, load growth that's affecting transmission need. And that's a limited view of what I think is the more holistic bottom-up joint system integrated planning that I think is being requested here by the legislature and the commission. So I know it's kind of an evolution to sort of make reference to how this is now expanded in scope, but this one is in particular, I think, critical to consider that overlap, because those projects can be, you know, the lump load additions and the subsequent transmission build out can have a big part of the value stack that's usually in a unified cost benefit or DER proceeding. They have a tough time getting to that point, is my reasoning for bringing it up, because it's more, okay, we want to incentivize the DER market, like energy efficiency and typical sort of programmatic approaches, which is often difficult to get to garner the significant investments and procurement in a targeted location that can actually offset those larger system investment needs. So that's I think this is a great place to do that, and I just would encourage any word changes here, and maybe we can add some comments to that effect that would make that clearer.
Well, I guess the, you know, right up top, I mean, you know, instead of saying identified distribution constraint, why we just say electric system constraint? And then if you have other wording that you want to suggest after the next round, you know, you can do that.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks, Dan. Yeah, David.
Yes. From the very beginning of this working group, I've been trying very hard to go get resiliency and reliability involved in the locational value. Now, John, you're talking about it being brought up in case 9674. And so my question is, how does case 9674 end up interacting or directing that resilience and reliability is one of these things that the commission is directing, without there being something in here that says, and other values that the commission directs?
Well, that's what I indicated. I was going to go off and work on some wording, David. I don't have the answer to that question now. You know, but I mean, rest assured, I mean, the state policy goals also mention reliability and resilience, you know, so it's not just because you're not saying it directly yet, you know, it doesn't mean that it's not a planning objective. So, you know, I'm taking an action to kind of look at how we can maybe word the regulation to get reference to some of these things. But it's wider scope than just reliability and resilience.
No, I agree with that, but every time I get into discussions, it's always about non-wires solutions and about avoided costs. And nobody is really looking at, excuse me, that's probably incorrect wording. No value is ever assessed onto reliability and resilience.
Yeah.
And obviously if this case 9674 is going to do that, fine, but then the commission has to adopt this and direct it to the utilities?
Well,
I'm a little bit confused, that's all.
well, the whole purpose of case 9674 is come up with a unified benefit cost analysis for DERs. So if you're going to have, you know, locational value assessment, you know, basically you should be using the same assessments that you're using in that case, because ultimately, you know, your locational value assessment is going to result in perhaps a non-wire solution alternative, you know, or AKA DER to solve that problem. So you want to be, you know, in sync in my mind. So that whole case 9674 UBCA is trying to get at this from the other end. It's defining that framework, how you do these assessments.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? All right, Samrat?
Okay. I don't think we've made any changes here. Here we've added in the screening and evaluation of possible solutions, we've added this language. I think it was discussed last time around, for the most part, about addition of like using cost effectiveness as one of the considerations for evaluating possible solutions. Any questions, comments on this change? I think for the most part, we've discussed it in the last work group meeting.
Some of these things are important, at least in the reporting area. So are you recommending, like utility shall present their rationale for solution selection and DSP plans, including why alternative solutions were not selected? Or have you addressed that in the report out? Because that's, you know, I think somewhere in a commission order, you're going to see that.
I think so. I think we have it here. So choose solutions and publish plan. So
Okay. So you moved it. Okay. So this is one of those areas where you moved it.
Correct.
Okay.
So, yep.
All right. Then that's fine then.
All right.
I mean, it's okay with Chuck and the work group.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm assuming no comments. I'm scrolling down. All right. This is, I think, part of the rearrangement that we've made. I'm kind of lost, like, where we made this change, but
I think we moved it into the reporting section.
okay.
somewhere.
All right. Thanks, Paul. All right.
Okay. I'm okay with that.
Yes, did not make any changes here. It's just moving stuff around, and that's tracked here. I think that was it.
Wait a minute. Go back up.
Go up. Okay. Here. Up again? Okay.
No, why did you delete all this stuff?
It's up there somewhere. I've seen it. We just rearranged. See, you see the rate case filing discussion here?
Okay,
It's in here. It's just we moved stuff around. That's why, but we did not delete anything.
okay. All right, go ahead, Sonny.
All right, Chuck, did you want to go through OPC's comments in this section, or do you want us to go through all our comments and then have OPC on?
I don't know, Andy, you want to hit your 0.03 comments? I mean, you guys didn't look like you had a ton, and then we can just move on, maybe take a short break and move on to 04.
Yeah, we could do that.
All right.
Let me try to get
Right.
up on.
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing now.
All right.
All right.
Sure, I've got about 7 different versions of this thing open too. Okay, that's the one. Do you want me to share it, Chuck?
Sure, please. There we go. We got it.
All right, there we go. Same one. This I made, actually, these comments are just embedded in the original version because which, you know, was more just for me to clarify which of these comments were incremental from the previous ones we've set. And so I'll just highlight, these are all mostly, except with the exception of this one, this is the only area I put a red line in there as we were going through this meeting, was just, you know, we had mentioned this last time that the all possible solutions was quite broad. And so I thought maybe we could just specify this by saying across the entire electrical grid, generation, transmission, and distribution, and looking at solutions. I recognize and kept it at solutions because I think it is mostly DER and distribution side, like solutions we're looking at. Unless I don't know if in Maryland there is like a integrated resource plan for that handles wholesale and other bulk system considerations. So if there's not, then maybe it should be referencing constraints and solutions and not just solutions here.
Yeah, let me tell you the source of that, Andy. That's actually in a commission order, and the definition, the wording was wording that was lifted from the regulatory assistance project definition of integrated planning. So that's
okay,
where you got that. And it is in the commission order as a footnote, where they stated that one of their objectives was integrated planning.
yeah.
So I don't know. I don't think
I don't care one way or another.
Are an issue, but I feel like I want to stay somewhat consistent with what was in the commission order.
That makes sense. I mean, if you want to keep it at that, and then the utilities don't actually evaluate all possible solutions under the universe, then I think people understand.
Yeah, I think we can probably get rid of the all possible and then maybe do some other things. But yeah, okay.
Go ahead, Jacob.
Well, I guess I just want to highlight, making sure we're all on the same page, that this isn't a integrated resource plan. And so especially including things like generation, I want to make sure that we're, I don't think we would necessarily support framing in that way. And I think John would support kind of what you were saying, is keeping it closer to the language that the commission had used to create that consistency.
Yeah, I'll go back and look at the comments, and maybe you can all comment on it in the next version.
All right, so this is back to where we just left off, so that's good. Near the identify possible solutions, I just kind of, let me make that a little bigger if people can't see it. Just talking about, I think we discussed this a fair amount last time, so I just wanted to reflect that in our comments. With respect to non-wire solutions in particular, putting some kind of minimum requirements around that. Like I said, I mean, I think there is a possibility, if left vague, that it's sort of a single solution that is thought about. Large batteries, distribution connected batteries are often the first and obvious solution, but it's not the only one. And so some kind of specification, I think OPC had made this comment during the working group. So just echoing that and kind of putting it in this context that looking to leverage different opportunities, similar to the aggregations discussion earlier, that there's more than one way to develop a non-wire solution, and each one has different merits, and we recommend putting that in some level as a minimum requirement or expectation. I don't know, Chuck, how do you want to go through these? Do you want to
let's
just roll through them?
Yeah, go ahead and scroll through them. If folks have questions, just please holler. Otherwise, oh, there we go.
I guess with that one, I mean, Danny, like you said, I think we had the conversation around this as well last time, but just reflecting that we had this discussion throughout the working group around what level of requirements should be had with regards to evaluating non-wire solutions. And, the commission ultimately landed on what's reflected in this language here in the proposed regulation. So just, again, reflecting on that, our role here and responsibility here is to implement regulation that aligns with commission direction and order. And so, I think it's more appropriate to kind of keep the language consistent with what we've been directed for.
Thanks, Jacob. All right.
So this one kind of similar, I won't belabor this one. I think the discussion previously about the cost benefit tie-ins is kind of what we were getting at here. So just wanted to have an explicit call out, and again, when we work up the red lines, we'll take a look at what staff provided and see if that assuages our concern here and add anything to that effect. But just wanted to reference that cost benefit analysis. And I did reference there, so sort of to the other point about resilience and other things being left out. We did also second that in respect to these comments. So additionally, language needs to reflect the inclusion of those qualitative policy goals. So not just a pure, it seems like, and usually, like Paul mentioned, I think the cost benefit framework from the National Standard Practice Manual. So they sort of have reference to jurisdiction specific tests and things like that. So that sounds like what is being promulgated through the work group on the unified cost benefit. So, I'm not as versed on that. I need to get up to speed a little bit on that proceeding, but I think just wanted to flag that there is that relationship.
Yeah.
And
I'll just say they are using that as
okay.
The National Standard Practice Manual.
I think that was it on that. Just a recommendation to move this, and I think you saw staff recommend to move it one way. I recommended to move this down to the next section to reporting, because it's about at least the assessing results component.
Okay.
Made a little comment on clarifying language to be more specific. Last work group, we did sort of say, I think the utilities had a comment on this, that it like, where did this come from? And it was sort of referenced that it's from the JADE process map. And so I just have a few options for requiring specific evaluation of performance, by saying compared to the state policy goals, just to make that a little more relevant or clearer.
I'm not sure I caught that. When you say suggest clarifying language, be more specific. I mean, the JADE process map, from what I recall, just has an assess results block.
Yep.
I think
yeah, John.
All this other stuff was added based on just trying to suggest more specifics. So I think there's opportunity to change this.
Yeah, and this comment of ours was more in response to the discussion last group, which I don't think you were able to make, which was more like, should we keep this section in or out? And we were just suggesting, you know, and it sounds like that type of framing and thinking will be happening as you review all the recommended red lines and changes for the JADE references. So yeah, I think either way, we're good with it.
Okay. All right.
I think that's it.
All right. Anybody else before we move on to 0.04? All right. Why don't we take 15 minutes and we'll come back at 12:15. All right. Samara, you back?
I'm here. Do you want me to share the screen again?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, awesome. Okay, so here I have to preface by saying we may have additional comments based on what the joint Exelon utilities may file in terms of like timelines.
All
Can
right,
you hear me?
already Go ahead, John.
No, I didn't want to cut summary off, but I did want to make a statement based on, my viewing of the YouTube video from the last meeting, because I think there is probably a misunderstanding about this section that might help clarify some things right up front. So, summary, is it okay for me to go?
Yeah, absolutely, John. Go ahead.
I don't know if we got everybody on to hear this. Do we have OPC on? Or Andy?
Yeah, I know Andy's here, and
I'm here and I see Jacob, but I don't know if he's back from break.
Yeah,
Here.
I noticed that there was a lot of confusion about the way this was written at the last meeting, and I heard some of the stakeholders talk about that it kind of mixed the annual update requirements with the plan development requirements, and I just wanted to state that that was intentional. Now, it may not be right. I mean, you guys can change all that because unlike the previous section, there's no J process map. I mean, I just tried to go with the utility strawman, at least for most of the way it was organized. Except I took some license to kind of I think incorporate what I perceived was the commission intent with regard to what's going to happen with annual meetings. The one thing that I'm sensing as a vision here is that we would probably have a multi-day conference somewhere, probably after the reliability conferences, which are normally held at the end of July, but somewhere in that, maybe Q3 timeframe, maybe even Q4, but probably in Q3. But I really am relying on the work group to provide the timing. But that multi-day conference would be for annual updates, which would be sort of, shorter in focus than, if somebody happened to submit like a 3-year plan that particular year. Because, you might have a day or so dedicated towards just the annual updates, and then maybe a full day or two in a multi-day conference dedicated to a utility presenting their, 3-year DSP plan or whatever. So that was the thought behind the way it was structured. So I kind of merged some of those things together, and I don't think the stakeholders really understood, what I was trying to do in putting those together, because I was envisioning a multi-day conference, although there was no recommendation from the work group of how you would do that report out, but it just seems to be not only the vibes I was getting sitting in commission meetings, but also just the fact that if it's your year to come forward with your plan, what are you going to do that year, for an annual update? So it just seems to me that, putting it all together into one multi-day conference and handling two different purposes with that conference, would be, naturally flow out of it. And I think the other part of it is the commission has said in a previous order that each utility is going to have their own docketed case number for their filings. And I think that was a point of confusion too at the last meeting. I mean, we will establish case numbers for each of the utilities, and basically, all the materials, no matter what they be, are filed by the utilities, and appropriate stakeholder comments on utilities plans, should be in those case dockets. So I think the 9665 docket is mainly for developing the process, whereas actual evaluation of the plan and review of the plan updates, that's intended for each of the individual utility case dockets. So I guess I'll leave it at that. I don't know if that helps clarify or confuse things, but that was the intent of kind of merging some of these things in the initial set of regs.
Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, no, thanks, John, for sharing. I think understanding where you're coming from, I think helps provide some of that clarity. I guess one question, as you're talking through that, I may have just gotten lost as you're talking through it. So like say, the one company or companies that are filing a full plan next year, are you saying that they would have a separate tech conference to present those full plans, separate from the other companies presenting their annual plans? Or were you saying at that same tech conference, multi-day tech conference, they would present their full plan and the other companies would present their annual updates?
Yeah, more of the latter, except, I'm thinking like the first day of the conference, and maybe more if it's needed, would be reserved for the companies with the annual updates, and then the, successive days would be dedicated to, the more comprehensive plan review. But does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think the commission was expecting to have, like just a separate, separate hearing. It would all be part of the same hearing, but just two different phases. But so that's why it was put together the way it was, and if it makes sense to split it out, if that's easier to understand, that's fine, go at it. But I'm just trying to explain why it was done, because there seemed to be a lot of confusion about that. All right, so I guess we're back to summary.
I actually raised my hand, John. I have a question for you. Along the line, similar questions as Jacob, not exactly the same question, but the technical conference, I guess what I was envisioning was it would happen once after the companies provide a report of their forecasting and scenario kind of development. So there would be one technical conference after that, and then there would be another one. I'm kind of a little confused.
No, just one multi-day conference each year. And you would just one multi-day conference. So for instance, if BGE, had a, it's their turn to submit their 3-year plan, but all the other utilities were just doing annual updates. The first day might be the annual updates, and then the second and third days, if needed, might be just BGE. Does that help?
That helps, John. So there would only be for BGE, for example, there would only be one technical conference, and that would happen after the plan is completed, or the way I was envisioning it at least at the work group discussions was there would be two. I don't know if we called it technical conference. That's how we called it in the work group, where stakeholders would have an opportunity to comment on the forecast and the scenarios, and then there would be a presentation of the plan. Are we on the same page on like how I'm envisioning the process, or are you thinking?
No,
different?
I don't think so. You know, again, I wasn't involved in all your detailed work group discussions, but the only thing that was mentioned in your final report was the annual technical conference. There was really no direction provided or no recommendation provided to commission about how annual plans would be submitted and reviewed. So this is just an attempt to, you know, at least on my part, to fill in some of that with my own thoughts, which, you know, you don't have, the work group doesn't have to accept. Chuck's the leader. I'm just explaining how the regs were written. And, you know, but I think it makes sense to try to put it all together. I mean, why would the timing be any different? I mean, I just think that, you know, one annual conference dedicated to the plans, whether they be updates or rather, you know, a completely redeveloped plan. And, you know, why would that be a problem?
Thanks, John. That's helpful. Maybe I think we'll get more clarity when the joint Excel on utilities file their plan on how that the whole stakeholder process and reporting is going to look like. I think, Jacob, if I'm understanding correctly, that's the plan.
Yeah, so, well, I guess two separate things. One, obviously, there's the straw proposal, which is kind of the framing and everything. But I had mentioned last week or last meeting that I was going to work with the other utilities to figure out the timing in the year of when this, to come up with some proposal in terms of like what is the planning schedule throughout the year for the utilities, to see if just there is a ideal timing for when people are already doing some of this work to kind of coordinate this. And so working to set that meeting up, and hopefully by next meeting, we can kind of bring some type of time of the year that made best fit for the utilities. Obviously have to coordinate that and support from staff and the commission and everyone, but at least starting point of, you know, existing planning processes for utilities when may be ideal.
All right, and one other thing when you're thinking about that, Jacob, Bobby, just keep in mind the commission's requirements to, you know, we have to file a report on distribution system planning annually every December 1st, and
Yep.
how that all feeds into the overall schedule, because I don't want to have like separate conferences and then end up having, you know, something that ends up being different than what we have to file. You know, should naturally feed into, you know, the end of the year requirements for the commission to make a filing.
Yeah, no, definitely agree, John, and in trying to incorporate that. I mean, ideally, as much as possible, those kind of reports could be kind of combined or filed at the same time versus separate filings.
Yeah, it'd be less burden on everyone, I think, if we could do that.
Yep, agreed.
All right. Samrit?
Yes. All right. So, okay. So we, like I said, we know we may have additional comments once we review the proposed timelines for comments and feedback by the utilities. I would just want to say that up front. I think John provided some background as to how, you know, and why the regulations are written the way they are. Initial thoughts were maybe it's helpful to kind of separate out the reporting requirement from the stakeholder engagement requirement. just looks like everything was like lumped together. That was our initial thought.
Yeah, I'll just comment on it. I tried to set that up the way the straw man was written.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, you had a data collection piece, you had a line inputs and assumption piece in the straw man. So all
Right.
those different blocks were aligned. The only thing that was combined, I think, was the plan development, you know, the 3-year plan development, let's say, and the annual updates. So, and that caused a lot of confusion, I can see.
Right. Right. So here I think I'm still a little unclear about, you know, what we're calling the discussion we're going to have, or the companies are going to have with the stakeholders after the filing of their forecasting scenarios. I think initially staff in the work group proposed a table that indicated that we called it a technical conference, the meeting that would occur after, you know, the companies file their forecast and scenarios piece. But I guess that's not what we're calling it right now. But so kind of what are the discrete points for stakeholder feedback? We just wanted to kind of identify that. We've added C here to make that clear.
Well, you know, I see what you've done there, but again, the utilities, when they provided their straw man and what was recommended, you know, they pointed out that there were certain parts where the stakeholder engagement would occur, and there were discrete opportunities with data collection when they align their inputs and assumptions and so on. So, you know, I was expecting the utilities to provide more details in those sections about, you know, because what I saw in the straw man when I wrote this up, it kind of indicated that, you know, details would be determined later. There weren't any details. It was just, this will provide you know, discrete point for stakeholders to provide feedback. So.
Got it.
And there were, you know, multiple points, you know, that, and the commission in its order, you know, added one more point, which I guess, they wanted, utilities to provide, another point. I can't find it in here. Well, regardless, it's I have to go back to the commission order, but I thought it was after all the stakeholder comments.
Yeah, I think they wanted the utilities to respond. I think it was, we had talked about it.
Yeah.
To respond to the feedback.
Right.
That was provided during the annual or technical conference.
Yes. Yes.
Correct. I think as it was written in that last final report was the utilities were going to publish that just to the website, but I think the commission then directed publish it to the website and also file it back with the commission.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the intent of that was, you know, to have one docket for each utility that you could find all their information and not have to rely on a website.
Correct. At least on the docket. And Jacob, is it fair to say that that there'll be, you know, where it says details to be provided or details to be determined, that you guys will take a stab at including those in your next comments for next week or next meeting?
Yeah, we can include those in the comments. I think a lot of that was in a version of the straw in terms of kind of outlining what would be presented, how utilities would kind of go about the stakeholder stuff. And so can look to pull some of that language into our comments and propose it in these steps.
Yeah, because I know there were some questions on how and when and things of that nature. So the more details you can get, even if it's just to get the ball rolling, that would be greatly appreciated.
And what would also be greatly appreciated, Jacob, is if you didn't just provide me narrative, if you just made the edits.
Okay.
Like
Yeah,
to
we
see
can do
that,
that.
because it's one thing to provide comments, but then it's another thing to actually try to figure out, well, how do you reflect that? And I'd rather have you try to take that stab at that wording than me.
Absolutely. Can do that.
Thank you, sir. All right.
All right, thank you. So that was really helpful. And, Jacobs, we added some comments about, how stakeholder feedback would be incorporated into the plan. And some of the language here, relevant, there's a reference to relevant information would be incorporated. So anything that would be helpful to see how the companies would approach the whole stakeholder engagement process would be helpful. I think we pointed out some things that you might be able to use to develop your plan. So just wanted to provide heads up about what our comments are, and hopefully that they will be helpful in the drafting of your proposal. So as I said, at C, we've added some additional information about, what should be included, what the utility should file, and the stakeholder engagement process, what it should look like. We mirrored what we provided as a proposal in the work group. We called it a stakeholder technical conference, as I indicated, right after the forecasting and the scenario development process. We've added some language here. I think is just kind of a comment. I don't know if I need to go through them, but it's just, just some language that, we thought might be implicit already in the regulation, may not need to be added on top of like whatever we have here. What else? Yeah, so, it was not, I think what we are calling technical conference, is a little different from what we staff at least call technical conference in the work group. So it might be helpful to clarify what's intended to be achieved in the annual technical conference. I think, John, you provided some insight into, what you saw in the strawman and then what you envisioned, but it wasn't aligning well as like what we were thinking as staff in the work group versus whatever we have here. So maybe some clarification about the use of the term technical conference. So about what should be included in the plan, we've added some language about how a utility considered stakeholder feedback. We've provided some comments from different jurisdictions, I think from Oregon, about how, what's considered an evaluation of a stakeholder feedback as an input to the utilities to see how they're approaching, that. But I think the plan should include how the utility considered stakeholder feedback, and if they didn't consider it, the rationale for not considering it. So yeah, so the scenario details consistent with the requirements in the regulation, that should be part of the plan as well. Efforts to modernize their current practices, whether DAR or load forecasting, and different, capabilities in terms of modernizing their current practices. So I think the plan should include that as well. Yeah, so I think, John, you addressed some of, I think, the background for the confusion behind the reporting and the planning aspect early on. So I would just leave that here. I think I've said this before. Utilities shall provide relevant updates to system constraints or prospective solutions. We have that here, but it's not very clear what relevant means. So perhaps like maybe we could add a parenthesis and indicate like what is that cost, load growth, whatever that information, whatever we consider relevant to be provided. Just some wordsmithing here about comments filed by parties. Yeah, so the timeline of the filing and feedback, I'm hoping that would be included in the utilities proposal, and then we'll have additional feedback once that's filed. That's it from our side today.
All right. Any responses?
I just want to be clear about I'm not going to make a lot of changes at this point until the joint utilities come back with their proposed edits. So I think Somri's comments and probably OPC's too. My suggestion is that joint utilities factor that in when they come back and propose their edits.
Okay.
Is that acceptable, Jacob?
Yeah, we can do that. It was something that was going through my mind because I know we talked about, sending out an updated version, but yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, I think if I were to make changes and then you were to come in and completely revamp this, it would cause a little bit of confusion about, where we were at. So I don't have an axe to grind about this whole section. I want it to work for both the utilities and the stakeholders, and it seems like there's already been a lot of work done. But I do think that the details need to be added by the utilities, at least as a proposal, and then have the stakeholders comment on that. But to the extent we already have stakeholder feedback, if the utility would try to consider it when they propose it.
Yep, we will incorporate that.
All right. Thanks, Jacob. Good call, John Borkowski.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, because we're 3 meetings in, and we've only got, maybe if we keep going every other week, we've got 4 potential meeting dates. So unless we want to start meeting every week, which I'm sure everyone does not want to do. So I'm sorry, Samar, I cut you off.
No worries. So I was just going to say I'm going to stop sharing and allow OPC to provide their feedback. All right.
All right. And hi again, everyone. If there's anyone new on the call, this is Andy Iden with CEG on behalf of OPC. I'm just going to share my window. These are pretty quick, I believe, but we'll see.
Yeah, you guys didn't have a ton.
The first one is just on this data collection kind of comment, I think in line with similar to what staff had commented on the later DER forecast section. Our intention here is just to highlight, I think, what might be an expectation or implicit, and just to make it explicit that the data should be provided and made available with sufficient time to review and have stakeholders provide feedback that could actually influence the plan. So I don't know if there's any comments on that, but I thought we might some specificity there just in our red lines. And then the same comment down here on the align inputs and assumptions. This one, so I recognize, John, kind of this one was in our last session, there was a lot of discussion around should things be reorganized, and appreciate that this section draws less on the JADE process and is more in line with the utility straw proposal. But this one seemed to be under, tucked under the preliminary plan, but it is more, seems more of a global comment for timing. And so it might just be good as a preface. So we'll try to reflect that in our red lines as well with some suggested edits. I think we talked enough about the annual technical conference on the last one, so not really much to add there. Yeah, I think just some more expectations. They're not really sure if we'll make any red lines on that, but I guess pertinent to the DER forecast, this may be something better put into the metrics section, so we can consider that. But just wanted to make sure that when we're talking about DER forecast, that if it's, and I guess now that I'm talking it through out loud, probably is what I was trying to get at with this is, try to get that baseline information, which probably would come in through the assess performance of previous plans. So maybe this one is just, we can ignore this, but just want to indicate having a requirement to put in, the last X amount of years to see a trend line versus just sort of saying snapshot in time, we had 1 year and here's our performance, but rather if years have elapsed, that would be good to see. This one I have 2 comments in the next 3 that are similar. So I'll start here by just saying, this is talking about system constraints that are new or have changed for purposes of consistency and just having stakeholders allow them the ability to sort of get a holistic picture of the planned investments. I would just maybe include reference here. We might suggest to say any investments that haven't changed, those should be surfaced as well in any update filing or during a plan development, rather than just saying what's new or what's changed, so that people can get a picture each time with each filing about the total investment. Here for this TBD placeholder, similar to, maybe this is just, I think this was language OPC had already put forth in the work group. So just kind of reiterating an expectation here for consideration and about timing and process for stakeholders to, and I think the commission order kind of footnotes or otherwise includes in their order an expectation of, that stakeholders would have that ability to get discovery and other things. And this may not be exact to the order, but I think we'll look at that in our red lines. This one is what I indicated. Oops, and this was my own note to myself. So this second one, I wanted to rephrase it. That's not in the version that was circulated, but in so many words, I mean, I was trying to read into the, we're all kind of talking through this and it seems to make sense. And then after the dust settles and these regulations are put forth, are these words gonna just about this relevant updates to the system constraints or prospective solutions that may have changed from previous years. So again, trying to identify or call out that if it's just an expectation to say, well, what did we file last time and now a year went by, what are we projecting going forward? But there is often sort of that middle ground of within the year, maybe a new customer requests an interconnection and it causes a project to be expedited for purposes of serving load or maintaining reliability. And I just wanted to make sure that that's not going to fall through the cracks, that we sort of get, again, that holistic view. And I think there's been some work done on California's, process to evaluate, even though they have a sort of distribution system planning process, which includes DER non-wire solutions solicitations, because of this sort of rolling framework where, you say, oh, we need 3 years of lead time to potentially deploy a non-wire solution, and the planning process has a lag and this and that. Those kind of considerations can make it such that the non-wire solution is always like on the horizon and never actually, because if most investments tend to come in through customer interconnection requests. I'm not sure the case in Maryland, but that was certainly something that other jurisdictions have struggled with. So that's kind of where we're driving at with that comment. And I'll pause there since those two, if there's any reactions or thoughts to that.
Go ahead, John.
Did I have something?
No, It looked like you were trying to make a sound there.
Oh.
Jacob's got something.
I think that was my last comment. So yeah, I'll turn it over to Jacob.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like some of the structural stuff, you know, that OPC you're suggesting for OPC, I think generally some of that makes sense. The only comment I'll have around the short term and the falling through the gaps thing is, you know, I think there's a well-trodden conversation within the working group around short term, midterm, long term. You know, where does policy fit into all that? Where does the focus really land? And I think, you know, ultimately kind of the working group landed largely on really kind of having that focus on that mid and long term, because it's where, you know, meaningful stakeholder engagement can happen, you know, where those DERs can really kind of be incorporated in informing the plan and recognizing that, you know, a lot of the work that happens in the short term is to drive towards system reliability and maintenance. And so just wanting to reflect that, like, a lot of the conversation did happen around that, and also reflecting that, you know, that's kind of, you know, where a lot of that conversation went.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And Jacob, I mean, when I was at PGE, it certainly was an interesting dynamic to hear, like, if there is, like, we were actually sizing a non-wire solution for a potential project where there was a lot of industrial customer base and some potential fleet electrification, and then you know, a new customer came in and requested 5 more megawatts of load, and it spurred this whole internal conversation about, well, what's our obligation for that customer? Like, will they be basically okay with a non-wire solution versus a typical utility investment? And that obviously differs based on where the jurisdiction is at and their experience with those deployments. And it's a regulatory kind of question. I'd say the point of me bringing this up was less about for those 1-year operational, like, I know those come up, and it's not to say, like, when they do, we want to make sure we have like some kind of emergency ability to screen non-wires and do all that deployment. I just kind of brought that up in conversation as context, but I think the bigger picture here was including at least the cost estimate and just saying these are all of the sort of projects, capital investments and things that we're looking at. That said, you know, I'll leave it to your comment and how Chuck and John and the rest of the work group react to that, because I was not part of the entire history here, but I have seen reference to that, like you said, about the time horizon. So appreciate that.
All right.
And I think that's all I had on mine. Oh.
All right. Thanks, Andy. All right. Anybody else? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I would just make the same statement for OPC's comments. I would like to wait for the utilities to provide a counter proposal before, not lose these, but you know, hopefully the utilities can incorporate both staff and OPC's comments and other stakeholders, you know, who have already provided comments.
Yeah, no, good point, John. But one additional thing, though, I would like to see, and John would like to see, is we have to start talking about metrics. So, you know, fine if you want to wait and see what the utilities have to say on sections 0.03 and 0.04, but we need to start thinking metrics. So if you have something you want, please include that in your next round of comments.
And that would be if we wanted to discuss them in the next work group, Chuck, like by next Thursday, you said?
Yes, sir. Yeah, so ideally, comments would be due. Give everybody a little bit of extra time. It would be, well, John, let me ask you this. John, if we get comments on the 4th, does that give you enough time to turn things around and get things on, you know, something out that week to the group reflecting the changes?
I would say if people have comments, just to submit them, and
right, but look, I'm just talking timing. Usually,
yeah, I don't know that I'll have a chance to consolidate everything. I mean, I will try, but
right.
If not, we could do the same thing we did here.
Yeah,
just have the utilities go, or the stakeholders go through their comments.
Right. Well, why don't we plan on giving a week? So that would be on March 4th. And that would give folks, you know, a week or almost a week to digest them before we meet again on the 11th. Any objections to that, concerns? All right, Jacob says okay.
Yeah, I think that would work for us.
Great, thanks,
For the,
Andy.
for the metrics section, yeah.
Cool, thank you. Yes, Samarit.
So comments on just the metric section,
Yeah.
or any section on and section 3 and 4 including that?
Well, I think as John suggested, it sounds like a good one to wait to see what the utilities counter with. Hopefully they'll take into consideration. I think Jacob said that they would, some of the comments that were made here today, and then OPCs and staff's written comments, rather than continuing to kind of tweak what we already have.
Yeah, and I'll concentrate on trying to get regulation 3, the process incorporated from the day, and I'll try to get that out as soon as possible. And then, if I can get that out in a day or two, we can also discuss that at the next meeting. Chuck's asked for it by Thursday, so I'll try to do that as a first priority. But I'll pretty much leave 04 and 05 alone. And as far as 02, the definitions, I think that towards the end, we need to sit back and look at what definitions we need and what we can discard. So I don't think we need to do anything on definitions for now, except to the extent that they were discussed today, like we talked about maybe defining constraints or grid needs. So, I think OPC may have taken an action to maybe provide a definition, so if there was something discussed here for a definition, it's fine to propose that. But I think the catch-all is going to be at the very end. We'll have to just look at the regulations in total and make sure we define things that need to be defined.
All right, very good, John. Anybody else? All right. Well, I'll send an invite out for the 11th. We'll look for comments for the Exelon's comments on 3 and 4 on Tuesday, and anyone else who has on Tuesday the 4th, and anyone else who has any kind of metric related proposal. We'll look for that on the 4th as well. All right. And with that, thank you all for being here, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, Judge. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you.